Lou here. If you're new here, horror is one of my favorite genres of games. Silent Hill, Mad Father, Frambo, and more are some of my favorite games. One horror game that many of you have been asking me to review is Little Nightmares. Roll the intro and let's talk about this amazing horror game. Little Nightmares is a game published by Bandai Namco that was announced in August 2016, alongside a very impressive display area at Gamescom in 2016. To many who knew nothing about this game, the twisted visuals is what drew many future players in. Many would say it would remind them of the book and film for Coraline. Seeing as Coraline is my favorite movie of all time, I can definitely see what people are talking about. Safe to say that I was definitely interested in this game when I first heard about it all the way back in 2016. Unlike most games, the director of Little Nightmares is not credited. If there is one at all, which is a shame because I'd love to explore the potential work of the other director, I can't find any. Though the game was published by Namco, it's actually developed by Tarsier Studios. They're a Swedish gaming company who was primarily known for assisting in the development of media molecule games like Little Big Planet and Tearaway. The only major thing I could find was that one of the main writers for the game, Dave Mervik, wrote Little Big Planet 3, I think? Just like the game, the development is shrouded in mystery, I guess. With not much known on the development, the game would release on April 28, 2017 to some extremely high critical praise. Many praised the game for its unique visuals and puzzles. Despite its high praise though, even the most praising of Little Nightmares critics did have some negatives to give. Many would criticize the game for basically having no narrative. While untrue, I can see where they're coming from to an extent, but let's dive into the story and explain everything. Major spoiler warning by the way, as this review is not spoiler free. Before we start the story, there is an official prequel comic for Little Nightmares that coincided with the release of the DLC for the game. Unlike most reviews where I tried to review something as a standalone piece, the comic released pretty quickly in time with the game, so I'll be using that by what's vaguely shown there to explain a few missing pieces in the game. While the game has a story, according to the developers, the real story here is basically one huge metaphor for the wild extremes of childhood, as they worded it. This means that the game is basically a heavy metaphorical look at the darker side of childhood. You play as Six, a child of an unknown age who is on a giant monster cruise ship thing called the Maw. Six is taken by a ferryman in the comics when going there. According to the comics, it is due to a overwhelming guilt or something like that, which we'll find out in the sequel for another time. As it stands now, we don't know what the guilt is. The Maw is basically a cruise ship for all the wealthy adults of the world who do nothing but gorge food all day. What food, do you ask? Children. The Maw staff take children and kill them to feed to the adults of the Maw. All the while, the lady watches over everything to ensure order. Six will have to journey around the Maw in secret in an attempt to escape. All the while, an overwhelming hunger takes her over, and each meal is more intense than the last. What starts with innocent food like bread and a sausage turn disturbing when she eats one of the little gnomes you meet in a deranged state of hunger. Eventually, she eats the lady and consumes her power, where she presumably leaves the Maw to do who knows what. The rest is very open to interpretation. While this is a fine story and is honestly extremely plain on paper, where the story really shines is in its metaphors. There's a lot of very unexplored themes in this game, mainly themes of poverty, oppression, and the cycle of greed. We see that children are treated as lesser than to the point where they're nothing but food for the rich guests. You could say that this is a metaphor for something like powerful adults ruining the lives of lower class children. I say lower class because there's very obviously a class divide in this game between children and adults. As for the cycle of greed, 6 eats the lady and gains her powers. This means that, on a metaphorical scale, 6 is basically repeating the cycle of greed by eating and becoming the very power that's been slowly following her throughout the game. Perhaps if you really want to look at this through a more in-depth lens, you could call this the live long enough to see yourself become the villain explanation of childhood, in which growing up means that we have to become the villain ourselves because of flaws in society as a whole. That's just my interpretation, by the way. This game's metaphors are extremely open for anyone to interpret in any way they want, though I will say the theme of cycles is a lot more prevalent in the sequel, but we're not reviewing the sequel yet, so... While many complained the story was too vague, including myself when the game first came out, I've grown to really appreciate it. Over the years, I've really started to appreciate games with vague storytelling in favor of unique metaphors. So Little Nightmares is definitely pretty incredible in that aspect. Overall, the story is pretty damn unique. As I consider graphics and design to be part of the gameplay, can I talk about how fucking awesome the art style is? I'm about to bring up something really obscure here, so forgive me for a second. But the art style for a lot of the characters reminds me of this character from an obscure children's show called Crashbox that I used to watch every now and then as a kid. Specifically, it's this character called the Revolting Slob. The segment was about understanding the meaning of longer words. I don't know, Crashbox was a weird show sometimes. But a lot of the characters remind me of that aesthetic, while other characters remind me of Tim Burton, which yes, is a dead trope to bring up in the horror genre, but I mean specifically Beetlejuice, like the waiting room of the Twisted Dead people specifically. While Coraline is directed by Henry Selick, he and Tim Burton were once friends and share a similar art style, so yeah, 6 definitely reminds me of Coraline too. A child in a yellow raincoat fights back against this mysterious taller lady who watches over everything. Just saying. What I find really polarizing is that the lady's influence and some of her personal areas are Japanese inspired, while other areas of the mall are European inspired. I'm not sure exactly why the lady is designed this way. I don't know the metaphors behind that, and I can't say I know enough about Japanese folklore to know if she could be some kind of reference, but I really love her design. Now onto the actual gameplay. I will say that this game does an absolutely fantastic job at making you feel small. There are several parts of this game where I feel incredibly tiny in this big world. Considering this is supposed to be from a child's perspective, that's fantastic game design to me. However, this game is a platformer with physics-based puzzles. Think something like Little Big Planet. Though, unlike Little Big Planet, the physics-based puzzles are a lot simpler. As you're basically on a giant boat, the screen sways back and forth really slowly, which makes certain puzzles require you roll something or jump on something as it sways with the ship. They're actually pretty fun. As fun as they are though, I do have to heavily criticize this game for making puzzles that are a bit too easy. Aside from a couple of falls and bad timing because I'm a dumbass with butterfingers, the gameplay you see here was for my first time playing the game myself, because I did watch a Let's Play of it when it came out, but that was years ago, so my memory remains a bit fuzzy. In all honesty, you can finish this game in a couple of hours, and that's what kinda sucks, unfortunately. I would have preferred if the puzzles were a bit more elaborate. The puzzles involving the janitor feel a bit more elaborate, albeit a little too easy as soon as you figure out that the mechanic behind how he functions is that he can't see, so... Despite the game being rated T, the puzzles feel more akin to something meant for a younger audience. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, like how the game Little Misfortune was supposed to be for teenagers before it was rated M. Still, for as incredibly basic as the puzzles are, I do really like them. There's some kind of really great satisfaction for solving puzzles in literal seconds, even if it's bonehead simple. Sometimes it's nice to play a game that makes you feel smart instead of sitting there for 20 minutes trying to decipher a whole language or doing those really annoying shitty block puzzles. There is also a DLC for Little Nightmares. The DLC is honestly pretty boring and doesn't do much for the story. It just explains that Six secretly had help when we didn't see it, and the origin for the gnomes, which is that the lady turns the runaway children into gnomes who live like mice. And that the runaway kid was the gnome 6'8", so I guess that sets up something for anybody who knows Little Nightmares 2. Overall, the gameplay is incredible at aesthetics and perspective, but really lacks more thought-provoking puzzles. I would also criticize bad controller response, but that might have been my fault, as my coordination sucks and my controller cord wasn't plugged in all the way when I recorded this gameplay. I adore this game, with its beautifully unique visuals, excellent metaphorical writing, and use of making a story without any actual lines of dialogue. This game is amazing. Does it have flaws in that the DLC kinda sucks? Yes. The gameplay is bonehead simple and probably meant for children? Absolutely yes. I love horror games that push the envelope in how you can tell a story and heavily experiments, regardless of the results, especially when a horror game doesn't rely on jump scares, but more how quickly you can escape this awful thing chasing you. To me, that's a lot scarier when that's kinda like my own little nightmares. Anyway, if you want an extremely unique horror game to play this Halloween, I highly recommend Little Nightmares. That would be it for this video. This was a really fun one to review. Who doesn't love a horror game where you have to run for your life from a creepy, mutilated version of your everyday anxieties? I know I do! Let me know down below what you think of this video and if you'd like to see me review the sequel sometime, because I think the sequel is a huge improvement from the first. Hey guys, thanks for watching! If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new. If any of you would like to help support my channel in any possible way, my Ko-fi page is down below in the description, along with all of my social media. For any subscribers, new or old, who'd like to help with video ideas, or maybe just want to talk about anime or something, I have a fan server linked down below. See you next time!